Here we are again from the islands of Hawaii and Ireland. Two island boys. Not those shitty island boys either.
John, listen to them, the children of the night. What music they make. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good, good.
My window unit in my studio conked out on me today, so yeah, it's a little warm in here, but I'm surviving. I got my
We
eyes.
don't have that. We don't have that problem here in Ireland because we have summer. Basically, summer happens in Ireland on July 1st and maybe July 28th or something like that. We get 1 or 2 days. Mostly it's rain and fog. Yes. No, it's not that bad. I'm only kidding. But how are you? We're here today to talk about the best vampire films ever. But to be fair, we couldn't possibly cover everything because the first question that comes to my mind is it's a case of in Hollywood actors who hasn't played a vampire. There have been so many people.
Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. That's like the only two I could really think of
Yeah,
right
but
offhand.
there are so many different versions of vampires and Dracula, and it's incredible that I suppose all this inspiration comes from Ireland to a point, you know, because when we talk about vampire lore, you can go all over the world with that. There are different types of vampires from Europe and the Africas and the Americas, and they're all as creepy as each other. And there's one in Australia, a myth about some kind of vampiric creature that looks like a giant frog with that lives in a tree. and and then there's another story of some kind of vampiric creature, I think from Malaysia, which detaches its torso from its legs and then flies around the place. Or another one where it's just a head and its entrails hanging from the bottom of it. So they're they're everywhere. But it's nice that Ireland is recognised for Bram Stoker, and Bram Stoker isn't necessarily the father of. Well, I suppose to many he is the father of Dracula. He's the grandfather of Dracula, godfather of Dracula, whatever you want to call him. But he too was inspired by elements of the past, writers of the past, because Bram Stoker started off
Well, he was
as
inspired by Vlad Tepes. I mean, from Transylvania. Well, it wasn't known as Transylvania at that time. I forget the name of it. It was another name back in that time period. I can't think
but
of
he,
it right.
he certainly would have been inspired by other writers as well. He started off. He studied mathematics in Trinity College in Dublin, and he he became a theatre critic for a newspaper, and that's kind of where some of his original writings were very dull and drab stuff, and which were more to do with probably his work, and nothing to do with gothic stuff like Dracula, etc. But there are a few interesting theories as to why he wrote Dracula, and I find some of them quite interesting. And the two of the most interesting ones that I like, and they're purely theoretical, of course, is when he was young, he had some unknown illness that people aren't necessarily sure of, and he was bedridden for quite a few years. And it's thought that his family may have done some kind of bloodletting in order to cure his illness, and that's where he maybe got the idea for writing the novel. The other one is that in the mid 1800s here in Ireland, there was a great famine, and with all due respects to the history of the famine, and I don't mean to speak ill of it, but there were stories that people were so hungry that they would eat each other. So Bram Stoker's mother would have obviously lived through the famine and known of the famine, and she would have told him those kind of gory, horrific stories. Um, and then perhaps that's where he got the idea of this whole flesh eating and blood drinking and all that features in the novel Dracula. But from that novel, we have so much to talk about today, and where to begin. So,
I mean, when you look at that history on top of what, Bram Stoker did, I mean, when you look really, I mean, the vampire lore is as old as mankind itself.
yeah,
There's biblical record. I mean, there biblical scholars have picked up a name in that's in like old Arabic or Hebrew. That's Aluka, which means a bloodlusting monster. That's mentioned in the Bible. In Croatia in 1579, there was a man by the name of Juri Grando Alavic, and he was basically he's in history as the world's first true vampire. That's what it's listed as. Whether he was or not, that's you
again,
can make your own assumptions there. I mean,
yeah, let's not shit all over the idea of people enjoying lore. Let's people we'll let people make up their own minds. But there's situations in history in Austria where the, they were going around and digging up corpses, and apparently there was no decomposition, and their hair had grown and their nails had grown and their stomachs were bloated, which made them look like they had been out and about since their death and had been feeding. But um, a physician had to go around and tell these people that this is actually what happens to certain people after they die. And it's not because they're out there feasting on the blood of humans. But um, look, as I say, if people want to believe this stuff, absolutely, it's fun, it's harmless. Because there are people in the world who believe they are vampires. And I'm sure they probably go down to the local butcher shop and ask them for pints of blood or whatever and drink it, and fair enough if that's what they want to do.
oh,
It
I
may
mean,
taste
my
like
God,
shit.
that subculture is big. I mean, it's really big in Brazil, in South America. Brazil has like vampire nightclubs, and people are part of covens and all this stuff. So it's a pretty big subculture, and even in the states, we have it here as well.
But when you look back at all these vampires that have been immortalized in movies, there's one thing they all have in common. Uh, they all look fucking cool. They really do. Gary Oldman looks amazing in some of his outfits. I'm thinking of George Hamilton, I am, and Bela Lugosi, and so many other people. Yeah, okay, the Twilight Saga. That's it. I'm not mentioning it anymore, right? Okay, they
Can't believe
do
you
look,
brought that up.
but they do look quite cool. So I'm not surprised that people would want to replicate their attire, or even their widow's peak that they have. Unfortunately, I don't have a widow's peak. I have a backwards widow's peak. Yeah, but
I just
so
have no peak, flat.
but um Which film would you like to start with today? Because look, we're not going to cover every single vampire film today, but we're going to try and touch upon some of people's favorites at least.
Well, I mean, if we're going to touch on one, we need to start where it all began, and that was with
Mm,
F.W. Murnau's
yeah.
Nosferatu Symphony. I think it was called a Symphony of Terror or Horror, something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
But that had Max Schreck in it, and he was supposed to be Count Dracula. But like you're going to tell everybody here in a second, there was some legality issues there with that using that name, so they had to change it to Count Orlok, and it was a silent film, and it was. I mean, I still watch it to this day, and there is a fucking creep factor to that movie. I mean, still to this day, he wasn't a handsome, like, sex appeal type of vampire. He was very ghoulish looking. He was very bat like. Um, and the way he would just, creep about, and the way that they did the way they shot everything with the shadow, especially that iconic scene of watching his shadow go up the stairs.
Mm.
Just, such a great movie.
It is a fantastic film, and people would have said that Max Schreck was a real vampire, when in actual fact, many would disagree and say that Max Schreck was just a very dedicated actor. He was apparently a very aloof person, and he just really got into his characters because he played more than obviously Nosferatu.
Well, he
But
wasn't the most handsome person of his time. He was very gaunt and really skinny and pale complected. So yeah, he did look like a freaking vampire. So he was
yeah,
perfect for the role.
he was perfect. And when you talk about, earlier on we were on about looking cool as a vampire, then Nosferatu is certainly not your cool looking vampire. He is definitely scary. And I remember as a child watching Salem's Lot, and there's one vampire in that who is certainly resembles Nosferatu. But the weird story about Nosferatu is that they did, to be fair, totally rip off the idea of Dracula, and it was just the same thing with names changed, as you say. Wasn't Dracula, it was Nosferatu, and because of this, um, Bram Stoker's widow, because Bram Stoker would have died around 1912. His widow heard about it, and she kind of thought, look, this isn't on. And I think she actually was, I suppose, influenced to sue these people, and she won the court case. And the outcome of the court case was that all copies of Nosferatu, as well as her being paid, compensated financially, but that all copies were to be burned and never again, if you'll pardon the pun, see the light of day. But that was done, and some copies thankfully survived, because otherwise we wouldn't have what we have today. And and there is that fantastic film with Willem Dafoe and John Malkovich about the making of the film, which I know you're going to talk about in a while. And that in itself is a great film, and Willem Dafoe is, again, Willem Dafoe is incredible in that role because he just gave great dedication, the same way as Max Schreck did. Now, obviously, Willem Dafoe wasn't as aloof as what Max Schreck was, but still, as you say, that's ironically where it began, because this is before Bela Lugosi and before everything else.
Well, that movie that you're referencing, Shadow of the Vampire, the cool thing about that movie is actually they played off of that urban legend, that there is an actual urban legend out there that Max Schreck was indeed a vampire. It's not bullshit. People actually believed it, and because he was so convincing. And so when Willem Dafoe takes up that part of playing Max Schreck, he is playing a full on vampire. This is not a guy in makeup. It's F.W. Murnau, who's played by John Malkovich, just digs up this vampire guy from somewhere and makes a movie with him, and it just all kinds of chaos ensues because Willem Dafoe can't control himself, so he's like feeding off of the actors and just all kinds of crazy shit that's just going on in that film.
And there were many actors who have gone full method in the past when it comes to performances. And I've heard stories of actors that if you were to call them by their real name on set, they wouldn't respond to you. But if you call them by their character's name, their head would turn and say, "Yes, what can I do for you?" And some actors have done that. But obviously, going around and attacking your cast and crew is taking it a bit far. But still, we have what we have today, and we have an absolute classic. There's no doubt about it. It's, as you say, it's creepy as hell. It's brilliantly shot. It's it's genius, and just a pity that it's tainted by the fact that it was a ripoff.
Yeah, but luckily now, because of all the legality issues, it's good and bad. It's in the public domain now, like a lot of these silent films. Nobody owns the copyright to it. And even if anybody did try to own the copyright to Nosferatu, I think a lot of those, the Bram Stoker family, which of course I'm pretty sure there's still relatives alive to this day, would probably come down hard on you if you tried to do anything with that film and tried to make any money off it. So
Mm,
it's kind of one of those things that you can go on YouTube and see it, but I don't think you could ever profit off it.
no, no. And it's amazing to think that I know some people would argue that it's a fantastic film, but I'm not a huge fan of Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. Uh,
Me
it,
either.
I'm not. Thankfully, it's not just me. So it's amazing to think that back in the early '90s, you have one of the best directors out there. I mean, you've got the guy who made The Godfather coming along and adapting this for the screen. And Gary Oldman wouldn't have had too many roles prior to this where people would have known him, but he certainly would have burst into everyone's lives after playing Dracula. He would have played Sid Vicious from the Sex Pistols. But what's really off putting for me is, oh my God, like Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker is so just, the English accent is terrible.
Yeah,
And
I totally agree with that, and I love Keanu. I think Keanu.
yep,
I mean, when you read anything about him, he is a wonderful, wonderful human being that just does so much for so many people. He doesn't look at himself in any way as a celebrity. He lives kind of like normal, like most of us, but he's not known as the strongest actor. He really isn't. I mean, he thrives in action movies like Point Break and the John Wick movies and the Matrix and stuff like that, where it's action and very little dialogue. Because when you give him something that's dialogue heavy, he just falls on his face, and he did in this film.
well, there's two stories about his appearance in the film, and to be fair, they're quite honest. Number one, Keanu Reeves would tell people that he was actually quite jaded and tired by the time he got around to making the movie, and that he didn't give it his best performance. He puts his hand up and says, my performance in Bram Stoker's Dracula could have been a way better than what it was. And Francis Ford Coppola has told people that he picked Keanu Reeves basically as this sex symbol for people, for females and alike, for some sort of appeal there. And that's why he got the role, basically. And
It was a bad casting because you're looking at a guy that was fresh off of Bill and Ted 1 and 2, and then you
mm,
put him in this big budget to be taken serious horror film
Yeah.
based on a classic literary work, and nobody's going to take him serious because he's, wild stallions. Blah, 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 I
Yeah.
mean, it's just one of those things. You're not going to take him serious. And then here he is, and look at all these heavyweights that's surrounding him as far as this cast. I mean, you've got Sir Anthony Hopkins, you've got Gary Oldman, the director, who is a fucking
Mm,
legend. You've got
yeah.
Winona Ryder, who, okay, maybe some might agree she's a great actress, maybe some don't. I think she's a good actress. Um, just on and on and on. And then you got Keanu, who
Mm.
played this dumbass rocker kid in a that's going around time traveling in a phone booth. You know,
And there's an appearance, as you know, from Carrie Elwes in this, and Carrie Elwes a number of years afterwards did a parody of Robin Hood with Mel Brooks called Robin Hood Men in Tights.
Dave Chappelle's
And,
first movie.
and he has this brilliant line in Robin Hood Men in Tights. He says, "Whereas unlike some other Robin Hoods, I can speak with an English accent." And he is actually English. So you have people like Kerry Elwes with his English, and then you have Jonathan Harker speaking like this dude. It wouldn't surprise me at any moment watching the film if dude came out of his mouth. But look, for me, going back to the 90s, and that's my coming of age time, what I remember most about that film is the soundtrack, the score. That opening score coming into the movie is powerful. It really is, and that's what I remembered most about it. But on rewatching it recently, I still haven't found a new love or anything for it, unfortunately.
Is it safe to say, or am I being a little too nitpicky, that it doesn't hold up?
The makeup effects are quite good. They're
Yeah, that, but the acting just, I don't know.
Sir Anthony Hopkins reminds me of Max von Sydow in The Exorcist with some of his behavior as um as Van Helsing. And I suppose, to be fair to them, they're trying to be as true as they can to the book, and I do applaud them for that. And like I say, it's got some very good reviews, but um, and I'm sure it has an absolute abundance of fans, but I'm not one of them. Yeah, sorry
I
guys.
mean, but so many people have said that it's probably the closest adaptation to Bram Stoker's actual literary work. So, I mean, it has that where all them other movies don't. And
Mm,
it's because, Bram Stoker's widow was quick to go after people if they tried to do something with her husband's stuff.
mm.
Like, Bella, I mean, okay, when everybody thinks Dracula, you instantly think Bela Lugosi.
You do, yeah.
I mean, that's, period. That's where full stop. That's the face to the character. I mean, he is the blueprint for what we have in Dracula.
He is, because
He,
he's the first version where we hear the voice of Dracula, and we have an actor who, when he came to America, couldn't even speak English.
yeah, he comes
And
from what was it, Budapest, Hungary? He was
yeah,
Hungarian.
yeah. So when he arrives, and he does lobby to play this role, and he wows people by performing it on stage. And you get that very, very famous accent that comes from him, that is later replicated by so many different actors throughout the decades. In particular, I have to think of Martin Landau in Ed Wood by Tim Burton. That's a fantastic movie, and he plays Bela Lugosi in it. And of course, you have Bela Lugosi creating that voice, and just that line, which actually comes from the book, um, Bram Stoker's Dracula, "Children of the Night," which we were talking about earlier. That's a great line, and that too is used in the '90s version by Gary Oldman. He says the same line, and but he has that kind of voice, almost like Bela Lugosi does as well. He speaks
That's
in that kind of tone,
that's
and
my big problem with the Francis Ford Coppola one is it feels like it's taken Bela Lugosi, Hammer Horror, Nosferatu, and all these other movies and just went and just molded it into a ball and just put it in the oven and baked it, and
mm,
there's what you got. Now, to be fair, it made a shitload of money. So, you know,
it did, but there was an awful lot of money put into it as well. This was probably made at a time where films were on the cusp of making $1 billion. I think one of the first ones to cross that threshold was, I know Jurassic Park was huge when it came out. Um, I think that they thought that this R-rated movie, and we talked about this again last week, where R-rated films they don't perform so well. Um, and then you have movies like Joker, which is R-rated and goes on to make $1 billion, and Deadpool, etc., and all these. But they're based off comic books. But you've got one of the most famous characters in the world, Dracula, and they do put a lot of money into it, and they do profit, but they don't profit enormously from it.
no, no. And going back to the whole Bela Lugosi film, there was two films that was made in 1931. There was the Bela Lugosi classic, everybody knows, but I, my own personal opinion, I think the 1931 Spanish version is better than the Bela Lugosi, and that one starred Pablo Alvarez Rubio as Renfield and Carlos Villarreal as Count Dracula. That movie to me was head and shoulders better than the Bela Lugosi. I know some people want to, string me up for saying that, but if you just give it a chance and watch it, yes, it's in Spanish, so you're going to have subtitles on, but it's just so much better. It flows so much better.
Yeah, but look, we could be here all day discussing who liked what and who didn't like what. The fact of the matter is there are so many films there that there's going to be at least 20 or 30 of them that people are going to love. And there are absolute classics out there that for instance, From Dusk Till Dawn, which to me is a movie that I actually would like to have watched and not known absolutely anything about it, because it starts off with George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino playing these two brothers on the run after robbing a bank.
Mm-hmm.
And you have no idea that about a half hour into the movie that the whole thing is just going to be flipped on its fucking head and have all these vampires come into it. And I love that idea. And it's great writing from Tarantino. But I just like, it's a great film. But as I say, I would love to be able to go back and just not know anything about this film. It's they abduct the Harvey Keitel and his family, and they get them across the border, and then we're into the whole Titty Twister bar, and all hell breaks loose, and it's a fucking gem of a film. It
Yeah,
really is.
legendary Tom Savini does all the character or the makeup effects in it, and he also plays in the movie as one of the bank robbers. If
He's brilliant. He's very good in it. I do love Tom Savini in that, and Richard Roundtree. is
Hmm.
fantastic in it, and Salma Hayek gives one of the fucking sexiest entrances of all time.
Wasn't Cheech
Um,
Marin in that movie as well?
Cheech
From
Marin plays three characters in that movie.
I thought so.
Yeah, yeah. He plays one of the border guards. He plays one of the vampires, and he plays one of the guys that George Clooney has to meet up with at the end of the film to give the money to. So, yeah, there's a heavy Mexican feel to it, with the amazing Salma Hayek. Like I said, Danny Trejo is in there, and Cheech Marin, and it's brilliant. And the end of the film, it and it not only feels a bit like, and I know you're going to talk about it as well in a second, the Lost Boys, but it feels like they home alone the whole movie at the end
Yeah,
because they're inside in they're inside in the bar, and they go into the back room, and they've got Harvey Keitel's character who is a priest, and he blesses the water, and they start putting the water into super soakers, and George Clooney has this big stake thing, that's powered like a chainsaw, and this stake coming in up and down, and it does feel a bit like Home Alone, but it's just great fun, and I love it. And Clooney has fantastic character, and again, wasn't that very well known at the time either. A lot of these people um, wouldn't have been so well known. I suppose Harvey Keitel and Richard Roundtree more so because of their iconic roles from things like Shaft, and Harvey Keitel had done so much with Scorsese prior to this film.
yeah. And
But
Tarantino at the time was still kind of still finding his footing. I mean, he was off of Reservoir Dogs and made a
mm,
shit ton of money off of that and Pulp Fiction. But you know, he had the critical acclaim, but he hadn't quite reached that pinnacle yet that he's at
mm,
now. He was still kind of an indie guy when you really thought about it. Still,
very much so. But on the same token, they made this brilliant film. I have to say, I have tried to watch the spin-off TV series, and I just can't get into it. I no. So I
did
don't know if you've seen.
Tarantino and Rodriguez have anything to do with that?
They're probably in there, as executive producers. They're obviously credited for it being their original work. But no, I think I watched about 4 episodes of it, and I couldn't get into it at all. So, but the movie is definitely A1, 5 stars for me.
And there's a movie that, if I can give an honorable mention to, that's in that same vein. It's called Vampires by John Carpenter and stars James Woods. And it is one of Carpenter's most underrated films. I think James Woods just plays that George Clooney badass vampire hunter. He's not a bank robber. He's a vampire hunter that's sent from the Vatican to stop these vampires because they're looking for a crucifix that will allow them to walk in daylight. That's all you're getting from me. So if you all haven't seen it,
Well, I do love John Carpenter, and I quite enjoyed that film. I like the ideas they put into it. For instance, the fact that their team is very well set up at the beginning, where they have these harpoons that go into the nests and drag them out into the sunlight. So
mm-hmm.
I did like that quite a lot. There are some people, I suppose, that wouldn't necessarily like it. And then there's a sequel with John Bon Jovi, which was
Yeah,
directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, called Vampires Les Muertos. Uh, I haven't seen it. I may just watch it at some point.
I like John Bon Jovi as a music fan and a basically a living room couch guitar player. I really
Mm.
admire John Bon Jovi as a musician and songwriter, but acting, nah, he kind of sucks. Sorry, John Bon Jovi.
Uh, yeah. So it, it's not necessarily one of my priorities, but I get around to it at some point. Yeah, definitely. Mm. Um,
I have
going.
to say one of the most brilliant movies of the 80s that I enjoyed was one with Nicolas Cage where he plays a man who uh, thinks he's a vampire. It's called Vampire's Kiss from 1988, and he has a intimate encounter with a woman who he believes to be a vampire. She bites his neck, and from that point on, he's running around with plastic vampire fangs in his mouth. He's hiding under couches like caskets. And you slowly watch as he's just losing touch with reality and just slipping into madness because of that whole situation. He just thinks he's becoming a fucking vampire. And the way that Cage plays that part, I don't think he gets enough credit for that movie. I mean, it's ranked high on a lot of people's list, but you don't hear it thrown around too much.
Nick Cage is one of these actors who, when he's good, he's fucking good. And I suppose there are films that he's made where he must have been paying off some mortgages or something. Uh, and even in the latter few years, he's some of his work is incredible. It's hard to believe that one of his most acclaimed films at the moment is a film where he's playing himself. Have you heard about that? Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I do want to see it, and it sounds
Uh,
brilliant.
it's got the actor who plays in the Mandalorian in it with him as well.
Oh, Pedro Pascal. Pedro
Pablo.
Pascal.
Yeah, yep. There you
Yeah,
go.
Pedro Pascal. Yeah. So I will get, and then a lot of critics were raving about Pig, which he made about a
He's a
year or so.
homeless man that was living in the woods, and his only companion was a pig, and then some people
Mm.
stole it. And it sounds like such a silly premise, but
Yeah.
guys, he takes that silly premise and makes an excellent film with it.
And you've got Leaving Las Vegas, which is fantastic. Both this guy drinking himself to death. So the idea of when Cage wants to put himself into a character, he can do it and he can knock it out of the park.
Yeah, The Vampire's Kiss was one of them films when I first watched it, I was bummed out, but at the time I was 12 years old in 1988, so I was like, "Guy's not a real vampire, this is bullshit." It wasn't until I got older and more mature and I think my taste in movies got a little bit more refined. I wasn't, just all about buckets of blood and gore, and I was starting to appreciate acting performances and different things of that nature. Going back and rewatching that movie, I was like, this is fucking brilliant. The way he's playing this, you can clearly believe that this is a guy that is just going batshit crazy. No pun intended. He's literally thinking he's becoming a vampire, and just the way everybody interacts with him, it's just crazy.
But you're living in a time where, again, in the 80s, there was so much stuff involving vampires because no matter what decade we're in, we're going to have something vampiric. That was like the Lost Boys, for instance. I'm sure you would have loved that growing up. And if you want to compare the Lost Boys to Vampire's Kiss, then they're two completely different genres.
Well, The
Um,
Lost Boys is always going to hold a special place in my heart because it's in my top five favorite movies. Everybody says it's the movie that made vampires sexy. I would say, yeah, maybe I can kind of see that, but yeah, I mean, I could see it. Them putting the sex appeal more out front with that movie, but the sex appeal's kind of always been there with vampires. When you had Bela Lugosi, I mean, Bela Lugosi was, he was a ladies' man. Christopher Lee, was a very handsome man. I mean, for his time, So it's hard for me to say Lost Boys really brought the sex appeal. Now, did it bring the punk rock kind of 80s, the hair metal band, the cool hipness to it? Yes, very much so. Yeah. Um,
It had all those things as well that we loved from the 80s. You had the two Corys. Unfortunately, we only have the one Corey now. Um, but we all know of the sad story involving those Corys. Um, you had Kiefer Sutherland, brilliant performance, and Sutherland to this day is still doing well. And then you had Jason Patrick, whose career has gone
it's
somewhere
fizzled
I
out.
don't necessarily know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of fizzled out. He makes kind appearance. Well, the thing is, him and Keith are still friends, and
Mm.
they make rounds on the con circuit. But funny story about this movie: the movie was originally supposed to be written and directed by Richard Donner from Superman fame,
Yeah.
and
And
they
you could see him doing that, couldn't you?
yep, and the
Mm.
studio wanted him to make a more kid friendly movie, to bring in more teenagers and stuff. Well, Donner kind of lost interest in the project, so he left to go do Lethal Weapon, the first Lethal Weapon, and
Great film.
he still stayed on as a producer. I think he got a credit for it. But then they bring in Joel Schumacher, the late Joel Schumacher, and Schumacher was all about the hip and cool and sex appeal and different things like that. So to me, yeah, Schumacher was perfect for this film. Not so much the Batman movies that he did later, but this film, yeah, he was clearly perfect for it. And he,
I do like Batman Forever. I'm not a Batman and Robin fan though.
no, the
Which is,
Batman and Robin that was shit.
yeah, that was shit.
But
Batman Forever is fantastic for Jim Carrey, and to be fair, Val Kilmer is not bad on it either. So you know, Joel Schumacher, his work on The Lost Boys is it definitely you can see Richard Donner's work in there too, though. At least the influences, because it does feel like you're watching The Goonies with vampires.
well, the cool thing that Schumacher brought to it was the concept of what if we take the fairy tale of Peter Pan and make it about vampires? Hence the line, um, you'll never, what was it? Keither said, you'll live forever. You'll never grow old. Michael, it's been a minute since I've actually seen it, but that's kind of what Peter Pan was telling Wendy and them, you come to Neverland, you'll never grow old, you'll never die, you'll live forever. And that's what the premise of it was. And all these, we had all these other vampires around Keither, but they were more, it seemed like they were more about partying and immature and teenage angst and everything. And Keither, you could clearly tell, was way older than what he looked in this film. Like he'd been around for a while because he
And of
had
course,
more of a maturity about him.
you've got the other half of Bill and Ted in there. You've got Alex Winter in there.
Yeah, Alex
Yeah.
Winter,
Mm,
Marco.
mm.
Um,
And the one thing I do like about The Lost Boys, spoiler alert, is the ending to it. There's a great twist at the end of it, where the head vampire is revealed, and he turns around and he says, all your powers are, you know,
he goes,
completely
silly boy, you
futile.
never invite a vampire into your home.
Exactly.
You're
Yeah,
rendered powerless.
yeah. I do love that reveal. That's fantastic. So the Lost Boys is some. There's something for everyone in that film.
My favorite line is by Corey Haim, death by stereo. When he kills the vampire with the arrow into the stereo.
Yeah.
Um, the Frog Brothers. God damn it, that's got to be the most iconic vampire hunters because you cannot mention vampires
Edgar,
without
Edgar
the
and
fucking
Ellen,
Frog Brothers.
Edgar and Ellen, the names of them. Yeah. No, it is. It's definitely up there. I think when people think about vampire films, they cannot but think of The Lost Boys. And to turn the whole vampire thing on its head completely and go in an opposite direction from horror, What We Do in the Shadows.
And I've
Now,
never actually watched it, so I'm guilty.
it does it. You have to watch this film, right? This film is set in New Zealand, and the reason I'm thinking of the Lost Boys and What We Do in the Shadows is there's this brilliant scene. So it's from the brainchild of Taika Waititi, who is now, as we know, massive in Marvel MCU, with Thor: Love and Thunder coming out next month, and Thor Ragnarok being such a huge success, and Taika Waititi seems to be everywhere. But back in 2014, before anybody really even knew who Taika Waititi was, you had this amazing film called What We Do in the Shadows. So it's told by a documentary crew that go in to the home of four different vampires. And there are some absolutely laugh out loud moments in this film. I swear to God, I when I watched this film for the first time, I had to stop it. I had to pause this film so I could just catch my breath from laughing. It was that funny. There's one scene in it where they invite in these two normal people. Um, they have a familiar who brings them in, and they think that they're virgins. So the the meal that they give them in the house is just tinned spaghetti that's just plopped onto a plate, right? And the guy is sitting there and he says, "Do you want to eat the biscotti?" You know, he's calling it biscotti. And then he's saying, "Oh, look, the biscotti is worms and your cook is a snake." And then he's saying afterwards to the crew, "I got that idea from the Lost Boys where they were doing it with the rice and the maggots." And there is this fucking ingenious line in that film where one of the characters is asked, why do you drink virgin blood? And he says, "Well, it is like this. We don't necessarily have to drink virgin blood, but we do it because it is kind of cool. But it is like this. We would not eat a sandwich if we thought somebody had fucked it." It's fucking brilliant.
Yeah, that's definitely right up my alley. I need to watch this now.
And I'm not going to ruin anymore but it is absolutely fantastic. It's a brilliant film, and this film, I still have to catch my breath because I love that line. This film has spawned two spin-off TV series, believe it or not. So you have one which is called Wellington Paranormal, um, and you can look into that after you watch the movie. And the other one is called What We Do in the Shadows, which has four different characters, completely different actors living in Staten Island in New York. And you have the brilliant, I don't know if you know too much about Matt Berry. Have you ever heard of him?
Heard the name, yeah.
Matt
But
Berry is a British actor, and he's absolutely fantastic. He just he never bothers to change his voice at all. He goes around in a very posh voice like that, you say, and that's the way his character is portrayed in What We Do in the Shadows. So everything is I say, and he talks my old chaps, and then you have Nandor and Nadja who have the kind of Eastern European accents in it. Um, there is so many great episodes in this. There is fantastic one where Mark Hamill, in his kind of Joker voice, plays a character that's called Jim the Vampire.
Jim the vampire.
Just called Jim the Vampire. And one of the characters from the show, Matt Berry plays Laszlo. He goes on the run because he owes Jim the Vampire money. And his disguise is basically just putting on a pair of jeans and having a toothpick in his mouth and running a bar. And he changes his name to Jackie Daytona. And Jim the Vampire walks into the bar and, and he says, "Hello, I will have one human alcoholic beverage, please." And he pours him the pint. And when Jackie Daytona or Laszlo isn't looking, he throws it behind his back and he says, "I'm looking for a very sleazy character around the place." And um, he says, "But you are just a regular human bartender because you are having the toothpick in your mouth and you are wearing the jeans." And he says, "I'll keep my peepers out from man, so don't worry." And as he's leaving, um, Matt Berry says to Mark Hamill, "So I as I say, I'll be on the lookout from Jim the Vampire." And he turns around and he goes, "Wait a minute. How did you know I was called Jim the Vampire?" And there's this pause and he goes, "Your business card." And it's the club and it just says Jim the
Jim
Vampire.
the vampire. How did
There's
you
there's
know I was Jim the vampire? That's about as
Mark Hamill.
close as I could do to a Mark Hamill impersonation.
It's not bad. It's not bad. But um he's no, there isn't enough good things I can say about What We Do in the Shadows. I could talk about it for hours, and I do highly recommend that you watch it, watch the movie, watch the TV series, and if you get a chance, you can watch Wellington Paranormal. Like I said, this film has been hugely successful, and Taika Waititi and Jermaine Clement. Jermaine Clement, you may know probably from some people will know him from Flight of the Conchords, and some people will know him from Men in Black 3 as the big bad in that. He's fantastic in it. So they're all, and Matt Berry is one of these actors that people in America may not know so much, but people over this side of the world will love him for a TV show called The IT Crowd. He is absolutely incredible in the IT Crowd, and he has featured in so many other cult comedies across this side of the world. He is. It's astonishing that he isn't in more films, but I imagine that he's probably enjoying life with TV at the moment. He has done a few films, but definitely you have to check it out.
Ain't it funny? I know we're getting off topic, me getting ready to say what I'm going to say, but ain't it funny now where when we were kids, anybody on TV, it was considered like a death knell to your career to be on TV because all the money was in the movies. And now it's completely flipped. It's like, fuck, I got to get on TV because that's where all the money's at now. Because I think, me personally, I think the way of the theater is going to be gone within the next 20 years. The actual going to a movie theater and sitting down and watching a movie. I hate to say it, but I kind of see it.
I hope you're wrong, but
Yeah, I do too. But
like I've recently gone to see Top Gun Maverick, absolutely loved it. Great theater experience. And then I go and I see Jurassic World Dominion over the weekend, and I'm like, what the fuck did you guys just do?
Jurassic Park needs to just end before they do. It's getting to be like Fast and the Furious, but with dinosaurs.
And the newest one is just forget about it.
Yeah, and
Um,
you can only go to the whale so many times before the whale goes bad.
yeah, but I do love the theater, the cinema. So
I do
I
too. I
hope,
grew up
yeah,
and living in the damn
yeah.
things as a kid, pretty much. I want the drive-in to come back. That's what I want. I want the drive-in theater to come back. I don't know if you've all ever had those in Ireland, but
No,
yeah,
we actually did have one in in a certain part of my county, but I think it seemed like I'm not even sure whether it's still. running or not, but it just seemed like a very cumbersome effort for people. And people were driving in. I have never experienced it, but people were driving into this drive-in theater, and they were tuning in with their radio to the sound on the movie. But then they were having to buy or rent stuff for their cars so the windows wouldn't get fogged up as they were all sitting in it. So no, I've never experienced it, but
So we have
um,
one in Georgia when I was stationed there called Jessup Drive-In. I don't know if it's still open, but if it is, what's up, Jessup Drive-In peeps? I love that drive-in. It's like it might be the only one in the whole entire state of Georgia now. But you could go and you paid for one movie, but you got two movies. So what you would get is you would get the current movie first, and then if you wanted to stick around, you could watch a classic, just an old B movie or an older film or anything that maybe like I missed out on seeing oh God, what movie was it? Dead Poet Society when it came out with Robin Williams. Brilliant movie. I know it's not a vampire movie or anything like that, but it's a brilliant film. I didn't get to see it in theaters as a kid, and I got to see it at that drive-in, and I am forever grateful to those people for actually showing it because it was just such an experience that I didn't have it, that just seeing it on my TV. The thing I loved about that drive-in was is I could take my kids there and sit up and I could actually sit lounge chairs up and have friends and we could sit there and drink beer and watch movies and just have a good time.
mm.
That was the beauty of
Well, you see, the other thing as well is the problem with Ireland is when you have a drive-in movie uh, theater, we have a lot of rain in this country.
it. Yeah.
So during the summertime, we'd try to show outdoor movies in the town where I live. They might be old classics like E.T., Jurassic Park, family friendly movies where people can sit on blankets as you just described there and picnic chairs, etc., and watch a film. But it's always weather pending because if the weather is shit, then it's not happening. Yeah. So you guys are pretty much guaranteed that more often than what we are. Mm.
This weekend, I'm actually going to go see Empire Strikes Back on a big screen, but I'm going to see an actual symphony orchestra play the entire soundtrack for the movie as they're playing the movie.
And that has been done in Ireland as well, uh, inside as opposed to outside in movies like Jaws and so many other things, and that's a fantastic experience. Yeah.
I've never got
Uh,
to do it, and I finally was able to get the tickets, and I don't have a date, so I'm just going by myself, but fuck it. I'm going to get the experience watching Star Wars with an actual symphony orchestra in front of me playing it because they're not going to have any of the movie sound. It's just going to be all the orchestra, which I
yeah.
think is going to be awesome.
Mm. I know the Jeff and Mario from Dos Incredibles podcast that I work with watched Jaws in. I think they said they watched Jaws on the big screen while they were sitting in boats on a lake, something to that effect. Now, obviously, a shark isn't going to come out of fresh water, but on the same token, just the idea of watching one of the greatest films of all time about an aquatic menace, and you're in water whilst watching it, brilliant. Yeah,
See, if they'd have
but
paid me, I'd have wore a dorsal fin on my back and just swam around and just went at people. And they'd be like, "Fuck it, fat guy with dorsal fin."
we've digressed somewhat, and that's fair enough. Interview with the Vampire. When last have you seen that?
Oh God, Brandon, it's got to have been at least 20 years since I've seen that
Mm.
film.
So I rewatched it recently, and it it holds up okay. Yeah, it's not bad, and it's I enjoyed it more so than Bram Stoker's Dracula. even though if you want to go by Rotty T's or Rotten Tomatoes, the rating for Interview is lower than that of Bram Stoker's Dracula. But
I
I,
think Interview with the Vampire is a far superior film to Bram Stoker Drake. That's my personal opinion
yeah,
because I like the Anne Rice books about the Lestat,
mm,
vampire Lestat and stuff. So I'm being
mm,
biased, I guess.
yeah, and she did the screenplay for this movie. So she had, quite a lot of involvement in it. And it's directed by an Irish guy. Yeah, it's directed by Neil Jordan. And Neil Jordan has made, he's probably more famous in America for people who will instantly know The Crying Game. Have you seen it?
Crying Game with Ben
Yeah.
Affleck.
No, with
Not
Forrest
Ben.
Whitaker.
Oh yeah. Why am I thinking of Ben Affleck being in the Crying? I don't know. You'll have to excuse me.
Everyone knows that there is quite a big twist in The Crying Game. And it's been referenced in several movies during the 90s. But Neil Jordan, who also dipped his toe into horror with Company of Wolves as well, he does a great job in this film. And he has gone on to make a more recent film as well about vampires called Byzantium, which I'll come back to in a second. And he's also made some Irish films here, which to us are classics, like The Butcher Boy is a fantastic film, and Breakfast in Pluto. But Interview with the Vampire has, again, you've got this massive sex appeal from two of probably the sexiest people according to certain magazines in the world, and that's Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. And it's Kirsten Dunst's absolute breakout role because she shines in this. She plays this young child, and she's absolutely fantastic in it. That they so it starts off with Christian Slater interviewing Brad Pitt, and he tells him about his life in Louisiana, and it's your real New Orleans Gothic stuff. And he meets Lestat, and he gets turned, and then later on you have the Kirsten Dunst character Charlotte being turned, and the the three of them together they work very very well. So there was great direction in this film, and Tom Cruise is one of these people who to this day I have great admiration for, because when that guy puts his work, um, when he takes it seriously, he really does. And I think everything he seems to make these days, um, he he just seems to be married to his job. The Mission Impossible franchise is incredible. The last Top Gun movie was absolutely outstanding. There's rarely a dud with Tom Cruise at the moment, so it's highly enjoyable. Mm. And the end of the movie has this brilliant piece with Christian Slater, which I'm sure people will remember, where he's driving across the Golden Gate Bridge and he does bump into Lestat. Um, and they play Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones, but it's by Guns N' Roses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's a great version. Yeah. So the reason I wanted to come back to Byzantium was because Byzantium was a vampire movie starring Saoirse Ronan and Gemma Arterton, which was actually made. Parts of it were made about half an hour from where I live, and there is a scene in that movie where Gemma Arterton is standing under a waterfall, which is made of blood, and just like I say, about 30 minutes over the road from me is the tallest waterfall in the UK and Ireland, and it's called the Mayor's Tail. And what they did was they dyed the water in that waterfall down the road, and they shot that scene, and it looks brilliant.
Hmm.
So to go that far just for one scene, in fairness to Neil Jordan, was just superb. And Neil Jordan is, to this day, he's still making films, and he's making damn good films as well. I mean, the last one he's made was kind of a thriller of sorts called Greta, which was quite good. So, but I would definitely, for anybody who liked Interview with the Vampire, I would check out his other work, especially his Irish work, and that being The Butcher Boy and Breakfast on Pluto. Two fantastic films.
My final vampire film, it's probably my number one in terms of my favorite vampire movies. It's The Horror of Dracula from Hammer Horror out of the UK. That movie came out back in 1958, and it had affiliations with Universal Pictures only because Hammer, I think, had contracts with them. But Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, these are two names you know from Star Wars. A lot of people, always connect them with that. But before that, these two guys were, in my opinion, giants in the horror film industry. Christopher Lee went on to play, he played Count Dracula, but in Hammer, he was also the Mummy and the Frankenstein monster and all these other different characters, but he was always linked to Dracula, good and bad. And he later on in life kind of resented even playing the part, which I found to be sad, but it was because they kept bringing him back and bringing him back and bringing him back. And it diminished the role more and more and more as each film was made. It kind of got just done to death to the point where Christopher Lee actually had them not even have dialogue for him because he didn't want to waste his breath. But that first film, the chemistry between him and Cushing, my God, I mean, Cushing is a master actor to me because he can play such an asshole with, you have Tarkin in Star Wars, but then you have Dr. Frankenstein in the Hammer series. But in this film, he plays he's the hero, but you fall in love with him and you're just constantly rooting for him. And he's got such a warmness about him, especially when he's interacting with the child that Lucy tries to lure. Um, but yeah, Christopher Lee just knocks it out of the park in this film.
When you talked about Hammer, um, doing the Dracula movies to death, you actually reminded me of a very famous line from another vampire film where there's always some motherfucker trying to ass skate uphill, you know,
Yep.
from Blade. So Christopher Lee was he was 96 when he died. He was one of these actors, a bit like Christopher Plummer, whom you thought would never die. That's when I heard Christopher Lee had died, I kind of thought, no, that can't be true. But
And the thing
yeah,
I always found interesting about Christopher Lee is in real life, Christopher Lee was a real life badass. This
mm,
dude was a real life badass because before he became an actor, this mofo was a Nazi hunter during World War II. He was literally going around and hunting Nazis. So he was SAS out of the UK, some kind of special
yeah,
operations. So he was a bad motherfucker.
mm,
I mean, I was watching uh, the making of Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers, I think it was the behind the scenes stuff. He was literally instructing the actors in sword fights how to act when they're stabbed in the back. He says, "Oh, when you get stabbed in the back, it forces all the air out of your lungs, so you're unable to scream." And one of the actors is like, "Well, how do you know that?" He goes, "Let's just say I've had to do it before." Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
You know?
SAS is one of these groups that are very enigmatic. You don't know a whole pile about them. So SAS is kind of like need to know basis only. Yeah, yeah.
But just to
So
hear him say that was like, what the fuck? You know?
yeah. Mm. Now it's fantastic that you can bring elements of a former career into your filmmaking. I suppose for me personally, any filmmaking projects I've done and subsequent ones that I do, like I'll be going to California to Eureka and La Lisa and other places in California to do the third channel in less than a month. It will be July 11th and I'll be traveling. But mental health is my profession. And I would endeavor to make sure that anyone on set that their mental health is cared for and that it's looked out for. And in studying that, I would have some medical knowledge as well, and knowing when people are sick, because people think that when we work in mental health that it's just us assessing people's behavior. No, in actual fact, we assess everything. We follow through on any kind of physicalities that are creating issues, and I certainly, and my colleagues that I work with, we endeavor to look after the biological needs and the psychological needs and the sociological needs of all the people we work with. So it's nice to have something like this outside of your profession, and it's also nice to be able to attribute that into your filmmaking work. So when you say that Christopher Lee was able to tell people this kind of stuff in Lord of the Rings, that there are there are people who will watch that and know. It's a bit like, for instance, I always get pissed off when somebody gets injected with something in a movie, a sedative, right? And immediately they're like,
Yeah, it takes a
well,
while for it to kick in.
yeah. Whereas in reality, trust me, I've been there. It doesn't happen like that. It takes a while. Yeah. It can take anything up to 40 minutes. It can take 20 minutes. But even to this day, there are very critically acclaimed TV shows where somebody will get stabbed by a needle with some sedative, and immediately they're zonked out. So for Lee to bring the reality of something like just being stabbed in the back, then that's, as you say, pretty badass stuff.
Yeah, it was actually it was Viggo Mortensen that he was telling that to.
Mm.
Because I guess there was a scene where he has to stab one of the orcs in the back, and he was telling it to Vigo, and then the actor that was playing the orc, because every time they were doing the stab, of course, the guy that's playing the orc was yelling out, right? And he was like, no, that's not how that really works. If he stabs you in the back, you're not going to be able to scream because it's forcing all the air out of your lungs. And I'm sitting there like, how in the hell does he know this? And then that's when they bring up, oh, he was SAS at one point in time. He used to hunt Nazis in World War II before he was an actor. So I was like, oh, so he really is a bad mofo.
Mm. And Hammer Horror still functions to this day. They have definitely
Starting to
made
make a bit of a
collections.
comeback. They're talking
Mm,
about making movies again.
yeah, and I know that the critics, when they saw the not just Dracula but other horror films that they made initially, the critics, no, the censors rather, the censors would have got pretty hot under the collar about some of the sexualized stuff in it, and they
That
would
and
have been.
blood and different things.
But despite them insisting on cuts, Hammer were like, no, they more or less told the censors to go and fuck themselves. And that's pretty badass too, if you think about it.
So in Horror of Dracula, here's a little nugget, guys. There are two endings. There's the original ending that everybody got to see back in 1958. That it was changed, so it's now been restored, and we have the original ending now. And that ending is when Van Helsing um, brings down the curtain, the sunlight comes in, and you see Christopher Lee as Dracula slowly decaying, right? You see the flesh peeling off of him, and he's slowly decaying and turning into dust. The censors at the time thought that was too grotesque. It was too gory. It was too much for the theater goers to actually be, put through, basically. So they made them change it to just seeing the hand. Well, as time went on, Hammer wanted to restore that ending, but what happened was is the original cut that they had was destroyed. Um, I don't know if it was a fire or what, but something happened where that cut got destroyed. Literally, a person in Japan had a copy of that original film, and they had to go all the way to Japan and get it to put that original ending back in that we have now. So they literally, yeah, so they literally had to go around the world just to restore this film back to what it was originally meant to be. So there's two separate. Now that original that got shown in the theaters, it's pretty much been, phased out. You won't even find that. This restored version with the actual what Terrence Fisher initially wanted it to be for the ending is what's kind of out there now prevalent.
And it's fantastic that we do have it. It is. It almost sounds like the Nosferatu thing, whereby it seems that all of this material was gone, but some of it was saved. You know, that it was archived somewhere and found later on. So
Yeah, it's just
it
funny that it was archived all the way out in Japan. It was like, holy, how in the hell did it end up all the way out there?
but there is we've spoken about this man before. One of the first shows we did, we talked about Irish fairies. There's a guy I know. His name is Eddie Linehan. He talks about Irish fairies. He believes in them, and he tells some fantastic stories. But he has gone to Japan on a number of occasions with his books and telling the Japanese people stories about the Irish fairies. They love it. So there there is demographics and audiences everywhere for all of this kind of stuff, but in particular vampires, and in particular Dracula. So 100 years, 200 years from now, we'll still be talking about this character. And yeah, there's some god awful films, and there are some absolutely brilliant films. But it's just going to be something like Beethoven or Mozart. It's timeless, absolutely timeless. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, God, it's like you throw a rock, you hit a vampire movie. It seems like, very much so seemed like in the 80s, if it wasn't a slasher movie, it was a vampire movie. It's kind of how it felt to me because you had like Fright Night, you had, there was a TV movie called Desire, which was about a female vampire, but it was more toned down. Of course, you had Salem's Lot based on the Stephen King movie. Or the Stephen King book, but that was a mini series. It was just everywhere, and then
And
it fizzled out in the '90s after that. The Bram Stoker, which we did get the Carpenter vampires, and then we did get From Dusk Till Dawn, but it wasn't visited quite as much as what it was in the '80s. I think it just kind of hit a wall.
as you speak of Salem's Lot, I'm reminded that one of my locations in California in a few weeks' time is actually Ferndale Cemetery, which was used in Salem's Lot. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. And it's pretty much, the very similar to what it looked like back then in terms of somebody was pointing it out in a YouTube video recently that the original faucet, this tap that was used in the graveyard that was in the movie, or the miniseries, is actually still there, and other little things like that. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yep,
But
and that's the cemetery where Jeffrey Lewis, who is the father to Juliette Lewis, was buried or was digging the grave for the boy, wasn't it? And he was burying him, and then the boy come out of the coffin and turned him.
yeah, there is that brilliant piece where he jumps into the actual grave itself, and you have that claustrophobic feel, and then that boy that comes out, you know. So a lot of people will have told me that they loved the book so much, and they felt a little bit let down by the miniseries. Um, that happens quite a lot, as we know, with Stephen King's work.
Well, you got to remember this was the 1980s, guys, and back then things was censored heavily.
Mm.
It's not as open and free, or wasn't as open and free with what you could do on television back then as what you can now. You can get away with a hell of a lot more now than you could back then. Back then, you couldn't even say damn on
Mm.
television. I mean, it was that strict, and it was just a television series for its time. I mean, it's dated as hell. It did it hold up? Nah, not really. Uh, but to me, it was one of Toby Hooper's biggest achievements. A lot of people don't realize Toby Hooper from Texas Chainsaw Massacre directed that.
And they are remaking it. They're either remaking it or they've remade it. I know that much about
Yeah, they
saying
are
that.
remaking it. They're
Yeah,
making it into an actual film.
yeah. Now the thing about that is, I'm not entirely sure whether they're doing that to because after a certain period of time, the rights of the book go back to Stephen King. So unless you do some work with it, the rights will go back. So a few years ago, for instance, I took my family to see the remake of Pet Cemetery, and
I didn't
we
care
just
for that.
wow, fucking hell. Sorry, but fucking awful film. You know, it was like they just slapped this fucking film together simply so they could keep the rights to the book, and piece of shit film. Sorry, no, but just terrible. Do not
And,
fucking recommend that film in any way.
and
So
everybody, kind of was like on board with the new It. And look, to be honest, did I like Bill Skarsgård? Portrayal was Pennywise. Yeah, I thought he looked creepy as shit. I thought they did excellent with the makeup and everything that they did with him. But to me, was it better than that 1990s miniseries with Tim Curry? No, not even close.
I would say that I admire the two of them greatly. I do. I think I love the way Andy Machete made it into two movies. That to
I
me
like
was
I
milking
like
it.
the way that he made. I like the way that he made Pennywise more animalistic. You know,
The the whole thing with Bill Skarsgård and the drool coming from his bottom lip, and there's some great performances in there from Jessica Chastain and from Finn Wolfhard and Bill Hader and so many others. So and then in the original from Tommy Lee Wallace again, directed that. And Tim Curry, Tim Curry is legendary in it. He is
the kids
absolute.
and the kids in the first It that they did in 2017. Yeah, 2017. Those kids were amazing.
Mm.
It was the chapter 2 or the part 2 that came out that it was more violent and gory, and you actually got to see kids getting like really ganked, like the little girl under the bleachers and all that. All these kids getting like done in, so you were actually getting to witness it more.
Mm.
But those performances by those actors didn't seem as strong as it was with those kids. Those kids just seemed to grab the bull by the horns and just go.
No, there's some fantastic performances in there. And these people, well, Finn Wolfhard, I suppose, if we're talking about the newer one,
Yeah.
he's got his own career at the moment that is flourishing. Jaden Martell is in there as well. Again, fantastic career that's going well. So, and then you have the adult actors, who are, to me, definitely people that I do like to watch on screen. In particular, I'm a big Bill Hader fan. I love Barry. If anyone hasn't seen Barry, definitely check it out. It's a great TV series. But Stephen King hasn't done a whole lot on vampires, really, has he?
No, not really. I think he tried
Mhm.
to steer away from too much of the cliche. I think he tried to create his own original type
Yeah.
stuff.
Mm. So I would hope that this remake isn't just, like I say, an excuse to withhold the rights for another while, because if it's anything like what they did with Pet Cemetery, I'll be throwing my popcorn at the screen and saying, fuck that.
Yeah, there's no way in hell that he had his hand in that. I don't think Stephen King had any hand in that, because that I'm like you. The original wasn't perfect, but it was closer to what the freaking book was than what the
Mhm.
shit that we got in that remake. That remake was just, it was Pet Cemetery in name only. That was
Yeah,
it, in name
yeah,
only.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So no, as far as other vampire films are concerned, I'm not entirely sure what is coming our way over the next few years. But look, we live in a world where it's dominated by superhero movies, and they are making bank. They are absolute, like, everyone at the moment. Well, a few weeks ago, everyone was talking about Joker 2, in a very enthusiastic way, in that it had got its title, which I was quite familiar with working in mental health, Folie à Deux, which is the madness of two, or the madness of many. Um, and then today we learned that apparently Lady Gaga is supposed to be playing Harley Quinn, and that Joker 2 is apparently a musical. And you're like, are you taking the fucking piss out of us? Is this a joke? And look, who knows? Maybe we love it.
It,
Yeah.
they might be doing the whole Paul Denny, as a comic book nerd. There was a comic called Mad Love, and it was by Paul Denny and oh, God darn it, the animator for the Batman animated series. I'll think of it. Uh, Bruce Timm, I think it was. But it was like a comic about how Harley and Joker met.
Mm,
She was a psychiatrist, and instead of her helping him, he slowly flipped the script and turned her mad, and
mm.
she became infatuated with him. They might be doing a musical with that, which I don't see how the fuck that's going to work, because the source material is not a musical type source material. It's very dark and pretty fucked up. I mean, when you really look at it.
And I do hope they go down that road. And look, maybe the idea of it being a musical is just exaggerated somewhat. But if you look at how Jared Leto's Joker was introduced to Margot Robbie's amazing Harley Quinn in Suicide Squad, Suicide Squad is actually, and I'm talking about the David Ayer one, is actually a film that I have never fully watched. I have watched, I have tried to watch it, and I have failed because it is so bad. Now, I know there are people out there that would say that there is a different cut of it, which is completely different. I absolutely loved the most recent James Gunn adaptation. Again, Margot Robbie is just fucking fantastic as Harley Quinn.
Yeah,
So she,
And John Cena took a character, uh,
Peacemaker.
Peacemaker, This is a character from Charlton Comics from like the 19 fucking 30s, like Shazam comics and stuff. Peacemaker was in that. So you're looking at a
And
character almost 100 years old, nobody knew anything about, and all of a sudden John Cena just makes this character one of the most popular and most talked about characters in comics now.
if you haven't seen the series already, then have you seen it?
Mm-hmm.
Ah, the fucking series kicks ass.
Yeah, it's basically
Series.
they've taken an almost 100-year-old character from a dead comic book and
Mm,
made it into a Deadpool.
yeah,
He's literally a Deadpool character. He's an
he,
anti-hero.
it's fucking brilliant. I loved Peacemaker. I just thought everything about that was, but again, James Gunn. James Gunn is an incredibly talented person.
And you know
Um,
where his learning tree was? James Gunn. He
he
worked
did
for
a lot.
he
Which
worked he worked for Troma. Lloyd
yes,
Kaufman.
he did. He did. Yeah. Um, Trauma is a bit of a hit and miss with me, I have to say. There's certain stuff I like, and there's certain stuff I don't particularly like. Yeah, but
But they're a
I can't.
company that can take nothing and make something with it. That's for damn
Yeah,
sure.
uh, Rabid Grannies is one of these things that comes to mind, and Toxic Avenger and things like that. But yeah, definitely James Gunn today, his work is incredible, and I suppose another upcoming vampire film that we can talk about is the fact that two-time Academy Award winner Mahershala Ali is going to be playing Blade. Yeah. Now we did get a hint of Mahershala Ali's Blade in the not so good
Morbius.
Eternal.
Well,
More,
no, it was Eternals.
yeah, not a
Morbius.
great film.
No,
No, not in my
the
opinion, anyway.
the Eternals would have worked better as a television series. It's people don't understand what was it called? The fourth whatever it was Jack Kirby created way back in the day. I'll think of it eventually. My nerd brain's tired. It's late here in Hawaii. But that shit is vast. If you've never actually read the Eternals comics, that shit this is not something you can just make a 2-hour movie out of and expect everybody to walk out of it and be like, "Oh, well, I know everything I need to know." No, you won't. You will not. Jack Kirby, everybody talks about Stan Lee and his imagination and everything he created. Well, Jack Kirby was on par with Stan Lee because that man had all this mythology in his head, this cosmic mythology shit going on. I mean, even the Justice League movie with Darkseid, that was Jack Kirby. He
Yeah.
created Darkseid and all that new gods and apocalypse and all that bullshit. So
No, again, comics today, um, they can be far too expensive
yeah,
for people to be collecting and or buying just to read. And
that's why I
for
quit
me,
collecting.
that's why you are.
I quit collecting. I couldn't. It was just too expensive.
Yeah, yeah, it is. They're far too expensive. I used to read the Walking Dead comics, and I'd buy the compendiums of them after a while, rather than spending my money on single comics. But no, I suppose I don't have much time for reading them. So as far as the comics go in terms of Marvel and DC, I can't say that I have a vast knowledge of them. So I won't even go there. But you seem to know your shit when it comes to it.
Yeah, I collected ever since I was a little kid. Blame my grandparents. You could probably blame my grandparents for all the reasons I'm a fucking nerd, probably, because they're the ones that introduced me to all that shit. But yeah, I'm like you. But I don't buy them anymore because one, I live in a studio apartment, so I don't have a lot of room. So I get all my comics like you in a trade paperback, which is for those that don't know, it's a collection of like 6 or 7 issues into one big book, and I get on Kindle, and I'll read it on Kindle. I borrow them. I pay like $7 a month through Amazon, and I can borrow books like going to the library. And once I'm done, I just return it.
Mm.
A lot
Yeah,
cheap.
I may at some point get back into it, but I'm excited to see what Marvel will do with Blade, and I know that Marvel and Disney aren't necessarily afraid of doing R-rated stuff, and they're definitely bringing Deadpool back, and you can't do ugh, Dead, Deadpool without it being R-rated.
Yeah,
So I would hope that they would bring some sort of R-rated stuff into the new version of Blade, and
I
to have
just hope they
somebody
don't.
like
I
Mike Daly.
just I just hope they don't bastardize it like they did Morbius, because Morbius was a failure. It
I Yeah, and here we are talking about vampires, and we haven't mentioned Morbius, and but Morbius has not just been shat upon by critics. Fans of Morbius, the living vampire, have absolutely just fucking gone out there and said, "What the fuck did you do with this film?" So much so that I don't want to go near it. I don't want to watch it.
I
Like
haven't watched it and I refuse to.
I think it again. It would be like Suicide Squad with Jared Leto again, another comic book film where I just couldn't fucking watch it. And I think that if I sit down to watch Morbius the Living Vampire, I just think that I won't last 10 fucking minutes if it's as bad as what they say it is.
My
And as
problem,
yeah, and as I say, coming out of Jurassic World over the weekend, I just thought, what the fuck did you guys just do?
the whole the Morbius thing, this was my problem when they first said that they were making this movie. Morbius doesn't. I just, as a lifelong comic book reader and reading a lot of stuff that had Morbius in it, mainly Spider Man, because he was in a lot of the Spider Man storylines. Morbius is not a character that, to me, you can necessarily make a standalone movie for. You would need him in a Blade movie or something where he could play off of another character, because his character, and I'm not shitting on the character. The character is awesome. I've always been a fan of Michael Morbius, the living vampire. I think it's, a great creation, but
Mm,
he works better when he's got somebody to work off of. If he's got, a Blade or a Spider-Man or somebody else like that.
yeah, and yet Sony are bringing out they're shooting it, Craven the Hunter, as well as Madam Web, and again, as you say, and quite rightly, John, these are characters that should be coalescing with other characters
Yeah.
in films, and
And I'm
and
a
and not
little,
having their own fucking standalone pictures where it's just absolute garbage.
I'll
Now
save
look,
I'll save my rant for later. Craven the Hunter is my number one all time favorite villain in comic books. I am a huge Craven fan. I was sad when they killed him off in '85 with the Craven's Last Hunt series. I have that in a hardback somewhere in my closet. My closet's nothing but books. That's where I keep all my comic collection. But and then they said, "Well, we're going to make Craven." I was like, "All right, we're going to have a Spider-Man movie where Craven's going to be in it." And they were like, "No, it's going to be a standalone movie." I'm like, "The fuck? How are you
yeah,
going to take one of Spider-Man's deadliest villains and put him in a standalone film?"
yeah, I know. It just doesn't sound appealing, and after what Sony have done with Morbius, it just it just has you gritting your teeth and kind of wondering. We'll just hope for the best. Yeah, we really will hope for the best. So,
Expect the
um,
worst and hope for the best.
so so here we are. We have discussed everything from comic books to Stephen King, and of course we've included as much vampire stuff as we possibly can. Uh, but to end our show, there is something that there's one of my favorite lines when it comes to vampires, and it comes from a show on TV that I grew up with that you probably will never have heard of, and it was called Count Duckula.
Yep, I did.
Okay,
I used to watch BBC on cable. I
okay.
love Count
So
Duckula.
the Count Duckula was a vegetarian, and his nemesis was called Van Goosevink, rather than Van Helsing. And one of my favorite TV lines of all time is at the narrator at the end of every episode of Count Duckula would always say, "Good night out there, whatever you are." And I just, to this day, it still stands up. I love Count Duckula. So, and another absolute fucking gem that was inspired by Bram Stoker. And as I say, still stands up to this day. Brilliant intro, brilliant outro, brilliant acting from an actor who's still alive here and was a very popular TV character, David Jason. And I could sit down today and binge watch Count Duckula and just have great fun with it.
Brandon just hit me in the nostalgia, just uppercutted
Yeah,
me with nostalgia
yeah.
because I had forgotten about Duckula, Count Duckula.
Duckula is just fucking brilliant.
Used to watch
Absolutely
that,
love it.
Danger Mouse, all that shit.
Danger Mouse and Duckula are the same actor, David
Mhm.
Jason. Yeah. So, and a lot of English people will know him for a classic comedy called Only Fools and Horses, which is absolutely fantastic for anybody that hasn't seen it. Only Fools and Horses has some ingenious writing from a guy called John Sullivan. A lot of them have since passed away, and a lot of them are still alive. But David Jason's Count Duckula is legendary. Yeah.
You gonna have me on YouTube after we're done with this? Look it up, Count Duckula.
So I bid you adieu. And I will say to people of Hawaii and people of America, good night out there, whatever you are.
And this is John and that fella, our Irish lad, Mr. Brandon Hayes, who will be in the third channel. So keep your eye out for that movie because he's going to be playing the main baddie in that. So can't wait.
I'll talk to you soon, John. All right. Okay.
Yeah, we got, yep. And if you guys got a suggestion for the next episode you want me and Brandon do, just go in the comments and leave us some ideas. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button, that notification bell, give us a thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever the hell you feel like. But it's late. I got to get my ass to bed. Brandon's got shit.
Interact. Interact with us. Tell us what you want, and we'll certainly go digging. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Good night,
So
Hawaii. Talk to you soon. All the best.
see you later, sir.
Hawaii.